delighted to be joined today by Bart de Monk, research analyst with Gartner, to talk about Gartner's 5-part webinar series for 2022, 5 keys to unlocking supply chain value in a time of crisis. Hello, Bart.
Hey Bob, how are you doing? Thanks for having me here.
Great, it's going to be a great series, I think, because we're covering these 5 absolutely essential parts of supply chains today in, literally, a time of crisis. And I'd like to run down with you them one by one and have you just comment a little bit on what we might expect from each of those episodes, so to speak.
Yeah.
Starting with digital transformation, which is a little bit of a vague term that people use, but what does that mean to you and what are we going to talk about?
Yeah, I think people are very familiar with the fact that we've seen digital disruption these last 2 years, right? A lot of things going on. But we've really come to a point where just doing these small incremental changes in organization just doesn't cut it anymore. So we're seeing digital transformation happening with companies, on the one hand, really creating different digital business models, but at the same time, we're also seeing massive transformation on the technology side. And one maybe good example would be here in Vegas this week. I was in an autonomous truck riding yesterday. So if you're thinking like we're doing these small things, we're thinking big, right? And what we're seeing is that because of disruption and because where we are at in our process within supply chain, we have this truly once in a lifetime opportunity to transform our businesses and our supply chains to become stronger and really get out of these disruptions a lot more efficient and really get set for the future.
And digitization describes the replacement of manual processes with automation in a way that makes things so much more efficient. So that's number one, we're going to talk about that. The second episode, we're going to talk about supply chain planning. Why is that so important right now, and what are the issues and challenges?
Yeah, one of the things we've really seen is companies that really weren't prepared for these disruptions, that didn't plan enough, got so disrupted by all these events that were really at a higher speed and at a higher volume coming at them. And what we saw was supply chains were getting depleted. And so when we saw companies that were much more prepared and did a lot more planning and modeling and things like that and creating network models and network optimization, were much better prepared for all these disruptions. And so we saw companies starting from really doing nothing to kind of being disruption responders. And what we really noticed is the guys that did a lot of work around planning, we call them disruption shapers, because they had so much less impact from the disruptions hitting them, and hence they would bounce back from the disruption much quicker. And so we've seen companies in a very large volume focusing on implementing and using more of their supply chain planning solutions.
Planning gets a bad rap these days because companies are so reactive to the immediate crisis, and this idea that the forecast is always wrong, throw up their hands, don't even bother. We're going to talk about how supply chain planning can really be made to work. Looking forward to that one. Cybersecurity and risk management. Again, the whole game these days. It's such an essential issue. What are we going to look at there?
Yeah, obviously, as we use more technology, and much more technologies online, security is a top concern, right? And we see that on the supply chain side. We also see that in other industries like the logistics industry. Cybersecurity is like one of the major concerns, or for people that are in high tech and industrial manufacturing. And we've seen all the security issues over these past few years and the hacks that have been going on. So the thing is that we need to be aware that the more we use technology that is online, in some cases we might be more vulnerable. And so now people are looking for how do we get to the digital information? Or in the example I mentioned earlier with autonomous trucks, how do you make sure that someone doesn't get into those systems and uses that vehicle in the wrong way and causes accidents? So security has become super important, and as we're collecting more of that data and doing more of these digitized processes, we need to make sure that we have that ground foundation of security covered.
And looking at it from the standpoint of risk management, which is so important these days. Companies are waking up to the need for that. So we're going to tie those concepts together in that particular episode. E-commerce fulfillment, last mile.
Yes.
What's that all about? I mean, the obvious, but...
I think people have seen, it's been in the news, right? I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that we've seen this incredible growth in e-commerce. And where e-commerce used to be something that was maybe more done by retailers, today, pretty much every company has an e-commerce presence, right? I used to work for PepsiCo. We didn't really do e-commerce, or people that were buying or selling fridges, you would go to a retailer and buy that. Now, every company is an e-commerce company. So volumes have increased, and our consumer behavior has obviously changed these last 2 years, so we've seen these incredible growth that cause a lot more complexity in the supply chain. What we're now seeing is that this last mile is really one of the most complex parts of the entire supply chain, and it doesn't just affect the last mile, it also impacts your middle and your first mile, and people sometimes tend to forget that to be really good at last mile, that product doesn't just appear magically in that last mile location to then deliver it. So how do you again plan and optimize your network to make sure that the product is needed where it's needed to then be able to efficiently deliver it to your customer, but also make sure you don't have to build too many warehouses or just have piles of inventory lying around.
Well, that is, everything falls apart at the last mile if you don't do it right, but as it reverberates up the supply chain, as you mentioned, that's a fantastic idea, so we'll be looking at that. And then finally, where it all begins, procurement and sourcing. What are the big issues there that we need to discuss?
I think it's no surprise, again, when we're seeing sourcing of products, we've seen lower inventories of products, so pricing increases of product, but also of services, right? Where it's direct procurement of materials, indirect procurement, things like logistics services, where we see rates pretty much in all the different modes of transportation having increased. So people need to be, one, more intelligent about where do they source. So are you going to buy products in China when you know there's capacity issues on the ocean side, and where we have increasing rates in ocean movements, full container loads, etc. So that's one part, and the other part is how do we get more intelligent about procurement? And there again, we're seeing companies heavily investing in the technology to help them with the procurement, to become smarter, to be able to reach out to more suppliers and more partners, and controlling that aspect of it as well. And again, I would say in one of the areas where we've seen a lot less of that, like indirect procurement and logistics, where the most used technology is still the Excel spreadsheet. There we're also seeing companies now saying, well, if we do have all these issues of capacity and rates and other bottlenecks, why don't we use technology there as well? So we're starting to see a lot of evolution across the supply chain of having sourcing as well as these procurement type of applications being used more.
So there we have it. We have 5 critical issues all tied together by surviving in a time of crisis. 5 separate webinar presentations featuring Gartner analysts digging deep into these issues with great advice and essential information for getting through the crisis and going beyond. Bart de Monk, thanks for the preview. We're looking forward to it.
Great, looking forward to it as well, Bob, thank you.
I've been speaking with Bart de Monk of Gartner. Watch for those 5 series this year in 2022. Thanks for watching.